We're on a historic tour of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. This is where America's space program began in the 1950s. We're going to visit some of the sites that make up 60 years of space history. This particular site is where America's first satellite, Explorer 1, was launched in 1958. How do you move huge rocket components around? By train. Did I say huge rocket components? Here's an example. So what's the difference between a rocket and a missile? Well, a rocket could be used to put a satellite into orbit, or maybe a human. A missile, that's going to kill somebody. This is a Polaris missile that was used until 1982 by the U.S. military. Here's another example of a missile. It's a Pershing II. Let's say you have a neighbor whose dog doesn't stop barking at night. You got the solution right here. The hunk of concrete I'm standing on right now is historic. This is the launch pad, Launch Pad 3, where the first rocket was launched from Cape Canaveral. It was 1950. The rocket was a German rocket. They called it Bumper. This is Launch Complex 14, the first Atlas pad in operation, and it's where the Atlas Mercury flight that John Glenn made lifted off from. And in fact, he has his own parking spot right here. Like many of the original launch complexes, Pad 14 is rusting away now in the Florida salt air. At the bottom of the ramp, you can see a monument to John Glenn. His 3-orbit flight was made in 1962. There's another monument at the entrance to Complex 14. It combines the symbol for Mercury with the number 7 in honor of the Mercury 7 astronauts. There's a time capsule buried here, scheduled to be opened in the year 2464. That's 500 years after Project Mercury was completed. This is the next stop on our history tour of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. This is all that's left of Launch Complex 19. NASA used this to launch all of the Gemini missions. From the years 1959 to 1966, it saw 27 launches, 10 of which were manned. Another abandoned launch pad at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. This is Launch Complex 34. It was used by NASA from 1961 to 1968 to launch the Saturn I and the Saturn 1B rockets as a part of the Apollo program. It was also the site of the Apollo 1 fire, which claimed the lives of astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. And the first crewed Apollo launch, which happened in 1968, was the last time that this launch complex was used. A skateboard ramp? No, this is actually a flame deflector. The rocket would sit on top there, and as it ignited, the flames would be diverted either side. You may have heard about this artifact from the early space age, the BEEHIVE blockhouse. It's constructed of bags of concrete. Launch personnel would hunker inside during tests of the Air Force's Minuteman missiles in the 1960s and 70s. Some 35 missiles were launched from a 90-foot deep underground silo at this site. Today, remains of the Space Shuttle Challenger are entombed in that missile silo. Behind me, it's not a missile, it's not a rocket, it's a lighthouse, the Cape Canaveral Lighthouse, originally built in the early 1800s for $13,000. A huge storm in the late 1800s washed away the foundation. They disassembled it brick by brick and brought it from the ocean about a mile inland. Now, the only way you could see the lighthouse now is through an organized tour, and right now the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex are the only folks offering those tours. Well, that concludes our historic tour of Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. I hope I didn't give you the impression that the whole Cape Canaveral Air Force Station launch pad complex is just rusting away. It's not. Those are only the ones I showed you. There are many active pads here today. SpaceX, United Launch Alliance are doing many launches a year here. And there's 3 new companies that have leased launch pads here. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, Firefly, as well as Relativity Aerospace. I'm Rick Glasby at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station for WFIT, listener-supported public broadcasting for the Space Coast.